feel the beat move me. I love you when you're on your feet now.
Let's go. Lofi Poli Sci coming at you. Michael Pickering here with our good friend Gregory Day, a writer, director, bookseller, and the voice behind HipsvilleAD, the fanatical sect of the god of subcultures and fervent rambling of all breeds of cinematic pleasures. How we doing today, Gregory Day?
Oh boy, I'm doing fine. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing quite well, doing quite well. And what top 10 movie list do you have for us?
Yeah, today we're doing top 10 punk movies.
Punk movies, top 10 punk movies. What is a punk movie? Come on now,
Yeah.
help us out.
Yeah, punk movies. This is films that feature punk in them or punks in them. And so this is going to be a top 10 list that represents punk music or punk fashion or punk culture in cinema.
Interesting. And so that tells us what the movies are by having punk in them, but what is a punk? What is punk? Come on, help us out even more. Give us the juiciness of it
Sure,
all.
yeah. So, I mean, I guess this could mean many different things to different people, but punks in cinema, especially, is related to like probably early the 70s punks and the early 80s punks of anti-establishment, anti-conformity, you know, just kind of anti-government, anti-politics, just rejection of every conforming ideal of American society at this time. And the music is a throwback to early rock and roll. It's loud, it's fast, it's not your parents' music. And so the films on this list are going to be reflecting on this subculture and how it relates to the societies that they come out of.
There we go. There we go. I think that's a good way to put it all in perspective for people going into it. All right, and what do we have coming in at number 10?
Yeah, number 10 is a film called Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains from 1982. This is the film I chose to start this list off because it's punk as a band. And so this is a movie reflecting or exploring what it's like to be in a band. This is the Fabulous Stains are an all-female punk band who are trying to get out of the economic hellhole of a place they live in. And they have some success and they start touring and they start touring with an even bigger punk band. And so the film kind of really gets into the dynamics of like what's it mean to be in a band, what's it mean to conform or to be successful, because the second you're successful in a band, you maybe will lose some of your punk credit because punks there is a what would you call it, like a it's kind of ironic that punks don't want punk bands to be successful because they want them to be anti-capitalist, anti-conformism. But if you're in a band, you're in a business, and the only way to make that business sustainable is if you're successful. So this is a movie that really deals with a lot of that. It also deals with sexism in the music world, because the all male band is starting to find that they are less successful than the backing female band on their tour. And yeah, this is a great early 80s film. It stars Diane Lane and Laura Dern, who are in the band, and then Ray Winstone, the great British actor, plays the lead of the other punk band they're on tour with. And yeah, it really goes into the Reagan era music scene. And yeah, it's just a great exploration of what it means to, are you successful, and what is the cost of success?
Oh, the cost is, survey says, drumroll, selling out.
Selling out.
That's and we'll talk about that more in some of these
Mhm,
other
mhm.
ones. But I mean,
Mhm.
that was always the critique about punk music, is
Yes.
that you never want to sell out, but if you want to get famous, you sell out. And like I said, we'll get to that argument later. But I love this trailer because, as the first trailer I watched, and for listeners, so Gregory Day sends me the list from 10 to 1, and he sends me the trailers from number 10 to 1. So I watched the trailers in order: 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so this is the first one. And wow, such a great punk movie. I was just like, I haven't seen it, but this trailer, I was just like, this is so punk. I was like, hell yeah. And I love the fact that the film industry was representing female punk rockers this early on in the movement
Yeah, yeah.
in 1982. That's
Mhm.
incredible. And like I said, I haven't seen it, but it really gave me the vibe that this film was about, like you said, sexism, and it was about the music industry in general and about how the industry's always trying to take advantage of musicians. But these women were too punk rock to be taken advantage of. And I was just like, I want to check out this film. And what, 40 years old? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
that's killer, man. That's awesome. Great choice. Great choice. All right, what do we have coming in at number 9?
Yeah, number 9 is an exploitation film called Class of 1984, which came out in 1982. And this is a film that stars punks as the villains of the movie, which was kind of a staple of exploitation films for a small period of time, where gangs were punks. They had punk fashion, and the haircuts and the colored hair and tattoos and facial piercings and stuff, and they were always the new juvenile delinquents of the 1980s. And so 1980, the Class of 1984 is the best of those kinds of films. It's a story of a high school teacher who moves to this new city, and he gets a job at the worst inner city school, and it's overrun with these gangs of punks, and they're terrorizing the teachers, and they're terrorizing the square kids. And it gets he gets in deep with facing off with the leader of the main gang, and who's called Stegman, who is a really brilliant guy. He's actually a really talented musician, yet he is just a complete monster beneath all of that, and just utterly chaotic. And things get super violent and out of control, to where it becomes more than just a high school drama, to where it really becomes an exploitation film where people are getting killed and things. And it does star Timothy Van Patten. I just got to throw this out there because he right now is, I don't know if a lot of people know who he is, but he plays Stegman, the leader of the gang, but he is a really famous television director. He's worked on The Sopranos, Game of Thrones, The Wire, Deadwood,
Oh, wow.
Black Mirror. He's just one of the most successful television directors.
No kidding.
Yeah, and so it's not someone people would know in their household, but they've definitely consumed a lot of the work that he's done.
For sure.
But he's the lead in this, and he's got the power of a young Ryan Gosling, almost like a teenage virility he brings to this role, and he's fantastic in it. And it's one of the most memorable, probably, exploitation villains that I could think of.
Okay, so I haven't I got everything you said from this one trailer, because I haven't seen this yet, but in the order that you were saying it, I was like, yeah, this is so kind of like a high school rules film, and it gives you that 1980s vibe, where a lot of 80s flicks were about high school and how great it was. And it really, I mean, full disclosure out there, people, we were not in high school in the 80s, all right? But we're going to just go ahead and say that 80s high school sucked, all right? But so it starts off like a high school film, and then it shifts into a gang film, and then you're like, what the fuck? And then it's punk rock, and then I'm like, okay. And then it's Dangerous Minds, or The Substitute Teacher, and it's where is this going? And then suddenly it switches to suspense horror feeling, and I'm like, what the heck is going on in this film? I was like, dude, there was so much in this one trailer, and it really kind of got me a little scaredy cat, I ain't gonna lie. And I don't like scary movies, so I don't know if I'm gonna check this one out, but I could definitely get the feel of how punk can be interpreted in many different ways. And I think you're right. In the 1980s, punk was associated in some places with gang life. And you would see the rise of punk gangs. And it also made me think that movie Warriors, that was also pretty popular.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And Warriors were more of a punk gang, and there was a lot of punk in that. So yeah, I definitely got that mixed with a bit of a horror film, and I was like, I'm not surprised at all. All right, so what do we got coming up at number 8?
Yeah, number 8 is a film called Burst City, also from 1982. This is a film as punk art, and so it's made. This is a film made in Japan. This is it's like a pseudo documentary of a bunch of hardcore Japanese bands mixed with this punk biker gang plot. It's all kind of messy and DIY, and it's a very anti-establishment film. It moves at 100 miles per hour. It's a very difficult watch, honestly, if you're not the type of person who wants to watch a dingy, sometimes aimless kind of punk odyssey. But it's a great film to check out, because it's you're watching a film made by someone who is just aggressively standing up to the norms of Japanese society, and showing this kind of, even though it looks a little bit like it's a futuristic post-apocalyptic kind of film, but it's really supposed to be set in modern times and about these street gangs and just kind of throwing away the traditions of society. And and then of course it's like where he just recorded a bunch of like really great hardcore bands in Japan. And so this is the only film on this list that is from a non-English speaking country, so I wanted to have the one foreign entry on this list, and you can't do any better than checking out Burst City.
Japanese punk rock. I dig this so much because a Japanese punk band, High Standard, is one of my favorite punk bands off of Fat Records. They hit pretty huge in the 1990s, especially to be a Japanese punk band to make it big over here. Well, I say big, but like punk rock big. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I hadn't seen this one either, but the trailer definitely gave me vibes of like the anime Akira, mixed with like a little bit of like Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Yeah.
But all of that meets like punk rock. I was like, dude, I kind of dig this. I was like, I may check this film out. And like you said, 1982, punk rock's hitting the film scene. I certainly don't see any punk movies today, but we'll get to that later. Excellent choice, my friend. Excellent choice. Where are you taking us to for number 7?
Yeah, number 7, we're doing The Road Warrior from 1981, or Mad Max Part 2.
Is it 91 or 81?
1981.
Okay.
And so, the original Mad Max came out in like 79. So this one comes out in 81. And this is punk. This is a representation of the influence of punk fashion on film. And so the first film had a lot of like biker culture influence on the costume design. But now that the second film takes place even further into the apocalypse, or further in time from when the apocalypse happened, the gangs in this film are much more heavily influenced by punk aesthetic, and it takes the punk gang kind of feeling that you would see in a movie like Class of 1984, but amps it up 10 times more, where it's the mohawks, the dirty leather, just super aggressive, nasty, in your face kind of punk gang. And this is a film from Australia, and so this is even taking it even further to just has this nasty attitude. And so if you've never seen the Mad Max films, especially this one, this is a high octane action film, and it's all about everyone fighting over the scarcity of gasoline. And these punks in this film are really nasty, even worse than what you would see in like Burst City, because there's a lot of assault and murder coming from these gangs. But yeah, this is a great example to see like the influence of punk fashion in cinema.
Dude, Mad Max Road Warrior. I haven't seen this one since, I don't know, probably like Late Nights with USA. I know most people aren't going to know what that is, but it's like cable television back in the day. And, like you said, a post-apocalyptic film with crazy interpretations of what we as human beings are going to do after we destroy ourselves. And it's so punk rock. And I even think like a tad bit of steampunk inspired as well in the fashion.
Oh, yes.
But man, I can definitely see why makes your punk movie list. This film series really was what launched Mel Gibson into the world, like whenever he then gets into like his Lethal Weapons and his Bravehearts and everything thereafter. And he's even speaking with an Australian accent.
Yes.
And it's funny because like after a few decades, like we just forget that he was Australian and he made these Mad Max movies. And dude, this is most certainly a punk as hell movie. I haven't gone back and see it. Did you by chance see it recently to see how it holds up?
Oh yeah. I love it. I absolutely love this one and the first Mad Max film. They're great, great car movies, and to me, like some of the greatest post-apocalyptic films ever made.
That's one thing about like filming with actual like at locations or on locations, like in the desert, and doing practical effects with real cars versus like CGI and stuff like that. So like I find that kind of stuff holds up a lot better 40 years later than like, I don't know, if your Star Trek or your Star Wars in the 1970s or 80s trying to use special effects, like that shit looks pretty shitty these days. But if you use practical effects like the costumes and the punk fashion influence and the cars and the desert and the dust rolling up from the tires spinning out, like it still holds up visually. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I will say, like, if you were into car movies, you're out there and you're like, I love watching fast cars and like, practical crashes. The opening sequence of the first Mad Max is untouchable. It's an incredible stunt work. And then of course, this one, the sequel, like the last 40 minutes or so, is just one giant chase. And that really influences the last Mad Max movie that came out, which is just Fury Road, which is all like a chase. So
Yeah, it is.
that kind of comes back to this film, where the majority of the movie is one long chase, as the gang is trying to get the tanker full of gasoline. And yeah, it's a great action sequence.
You made me think of it. I have a little trivia question for you, and it just came to me. So you were like, if you like car movies and big chases and car crashes and things like that, do you know by chance, and this is estimated, of course, but do you know by chance the most expensive movie franchise ever as a byproduct of all the cars they destroy in their franchise?
Hmm. That's a good question. Would it have to be the Fast and the Furious?
It is, because there's like
Okay.
9 million of them, first off, but they
Yeah, yeah,
destroy so many cars.
yeah.
And like, just even if they like like a lot of the fancy cars that they destroy, they're actually not the real cars, right? They just
Hmm.
get a like plastic shell of them made and they put it
Okay.
on a chassis and they
Okay.
destroy that. But still, it's still a car. And
Hmm.
if you destroy like over 1,000 cars, that bill adds up pretty quickly. But again, it's estimates. It just made me think of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to punk stuff. What you got coming at
Yes.
us at number
Yes.
6?
Number 6 is Suburbia from 1983, not to be confused with the Richard Linklater film Suburbia from the 90s. This is a true punk movie. This is a movie that really tries to explore the truth and honest portrait of what it would be like to be a runaway punk. This is a film that started off as a Roger Corman exploitation film about punks, but the director Penelope Spheris, who directed Wayne's World and a lot of other 90s comedies, and she directed the great punk documentaries, The Decline of Western Civilization. She makes a pseudo documentary with all these young actors about a found family of runaway punks, and exploring this hellhole of Reagan era suburban life, where the different families and basically like the decline of the moral decline of American families. And on both sides, it kind of shows like liberal families and conservative families and apolitical families, and just kind of how all these things affect the youth of America at the time. And these people running away, they run away from home, they join these punk punk groups, and they have the camaraderie of going to shows together, and they really face off with the town, like the rednecks of the town who don't like them, and the cops who don't like them. And so yeah, this is a really great portrait of like what it would be like to be a homeless kid running away and finding yourself in this subculture.
Yeah, this movie kind of hit me hard. Like we've talked about before, like punk was such a big, or it still is such a big influence on our lives and all growing up. But one of the first things that did catch me in the trailer is that kids with mohawks. And when I say kids here, I mean like little kids. And
Hmm.
my friend, I still know people who cut their little kids' hair into mohawks. Like I see like a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old walking around with a mohawk, and I'm like, "Who's your mom?" I know who you are related to. I was like, "Where's your dad?" I was like, "I know who you are." Uh, but I didn't. At first, I thought I saw this one, but then I realized it's exactly what you said. It's the other Suburbia that I had seen. So I haven't seen this one, but man, this trailer was it was a journey onto itself. And I could only imagine that the movie would even be a little bit harder to take. But like some punk kids living on the fringe of suburban society, fighting against like the local establishment, but not just like also their families as part of the establishment. I
Yeah,
was like,
absolutely.
I was born out of the 1970s, and yeah, that's a very well-known message to all of us, and it's a very punk message to be dealing with those topics. Even after like the civil rights movement or the women's rights movement or the LGBTQ2 plus movement, or all equality movements after like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was still so much wrong with society.
Hmm.
And a lot of those people who fought for all those equality movements, by the 1980s, they gave up and they moved to suburbia.
Yeah,
And
there's
I
a
kind of feel like punk is a response to that, and a response to those people giving up, and it's the next generation saying, you sold out. Like, what the fuck? Like,
Mhm.
you were once about civil rights, you were once about women's rights, you were once about LGBTQ plus rights. What happened to you? Why? And so, like, this movie, like I said, it's a very known message. I feel it a lot. But what were you gonna say?
Oh yeah, no, I was gonna say there's a great scene in this film. One of the kids, he basically runs away from home. His mother's an alcoholic, and he's just tired of being abused by her. But he steals her diary, and there's this scene where he and some of the other punks are just joyriding around in the neighborhoods, and he starts reading his mother's diary out loud to his friends, and they're kind of joking, making fun of his mom, but he's reading this thing where it's before he was born, and she's saying how happy she is with her husband, and that this is the greatest place on earth, this suburb, and that it's got everything you could ever need, and how bright the future looks. But while he's reading this, the camera is just pointing out of the window of the car, and so it's just tracking through all these houses that look the same, and all of these rundown vehicles parked on the street, and just how this place just really fell into disrepair, how no one really gives a shit about any of it. And it's lost its promise of what it was supposed to be. Yeah, it's just a great scene, and kind of like encapsulates the entire film. This society that's in disrepair.
That sounds intense, and it sounds like
Yeah.
a great filming technique to tell the story, like parallel the story of
Mhm.
just showing what you're reading, like a narration.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what you got for us at number 5?
Yeah, number 5 is SLC Punk from 1998. It's
What
the
does
punk.
SLC mean?
Yeah, SLC, Salt Lake City.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
it.
Yeah, so this is the reason I picked this film, was because this is the punk fan film, basically. It's set in the 1980s, but it came out in 1998. It stars Matthew Lillard as a teenage punk, and him and his friends are just trying to live in Salt Lake City, a city that is very famous for its conservatism. It's the home of the Mormons, and in the 80s, I can't imagine what it would have been like trying to rebel against that whole system. And so, yeah, this is a film about these kids who are trying to find themselves, and deal with the fact that they're going to have to grow up at some point. But what does that mean if you're a punk? Like, how do you grow up and still maintain your integrity as a punk? And I think the big message of this film is like, what is a sellout? When it's time for you to mature, what does it mean to sell out, or how do you stay true to your morals, but also you got to grow up at some point. So it's a great film, because I think it's probably nostalgic to the filmmakers who made it, but it's also a great coming of age story that does put some harsh realities in perspective of youth rebellion.
SLC Punk. This one was a staple of the new school punk movement, like without a doubt. That I grew up with this, and it was a huge point of argument for everyone. That on how the movie ended, and I won't spoil
Oh,
how
yes.
it
Yeah.
ended. Just in case
Yes.
people do want to check it out, because it is the most recent one on your list. So, like,
Yes.
and I think it still holds up, and the cinematography and the quality of the film, like, I think it holds up really well. Because I mean, it's only like 24 years old. So,
Mhm.
but everyone I knew saw this movie, and everyone I knew quoted this movie. And like, I knew the moment you said you were doing this list that this movie had better be on the list. And I think
Yeah.
number five is it's a pretty fitting place. But like, for us, like, a lot of people who were the generation right before us, and even those before them, like, their movies growing up were things like, like, Dirty Dancing, or The Breakfast Club, or Say Elmo's Fire, or Pretty in Pink, or even a little bit later, like Dazed and Confused. But like, none of those films were influential to me, or to like any of the people that I grew up around. But SLC Punk, this was like the major conversation piece for years, and it created so many arguments. And I think I may have lost some friends over this one, like arguing, can a punk survive age 18 to 21? And I don't know. It's still an argument, like I said.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say that this is also a highly inventive film. It's got a lot of great experimentation. It's got a lot of great gags. It's got a lot of great. There's some special effects in here that are really cool. Um, and so yeah, this is a film from an artist that I wish would have had been able to make more movies. Because I don't think they made a sequel, which I never saw 20 years later or something. Um, but yeah, it's got a great performance by Matthew Lillard. If you're not familiar with him, he was in Scream. He played Shaggy in the live action Scooby Doo movies. But for me, this film, especially when you get to the end of the film, his performance is just fantastic.
It really is. And again, like I don't want to spoil it for people because like it's pretty profound. And this is not an easy movie to digest at some points in it. Like it really takes itself seriously at some points, and it like is a hard look at the fact that when we say like punk, it's not just a type of music. It's a lifestyle. It's a series of choices, but it's also dealing with the ramification of those choices or ignoring them and just going down a rabbit hole. And this movie really delves into what some of those rabbit holes lead you to.
Mhm.
Some good, some bad, but this is one I definitely saw probably too many times. But you know, but where are we going to with number four?
Yeah, this is one of the greatest rock and roll movies of all time. It's not the first punk movie, but it's probably the most impactful of the first wave of real punk movies. This is Rock and Roll High School from 1979. It doesn't really deal with a lot of actual punk culture in this film because it's not really made by punks, but it does center around the Ramones, arguably the first great punk band. And so this is sort of a cartoon fun, like a live action cartoon, fun satire about rebellion in high school and these teens who are just trying to get laid and have fun. And their favorite band in the world is the Ramones. And the Ramones are treated like the Beatles in this film, like they're the biggest fucking band in the world, which we all know the Ramones were never as big as the Beatles around the world, but they were really
I'm
famous.
sorry. What was I sorry you cut out. What was that second band you said? Something with a B? I don't know who they were. I don't know. Maybe the internet just decided to bleep you on purpose because the Ramones, you just leave that alone, buddy. Yes.
Yeah. But it's like Beatlemania, excuse me. It's like Beatlemania in this film. Like the kids are just going crazy because the Ramones are there, which in itself is a joke, right? Because the Ramones are these unrefined New York guys who are here making loud, obnoxious music. And but what's great about this film is that it's not only a high school rebellion film, but it's also got extended concert footage of the Ramones. So when you get into the core of the film, you're getting these great Ramones footage. So yeah, this is a great film. It's a hell of a lot of fun. And if you're looking for one punk movie, I would say that this might be the one to check out.
Now, first, I'll say I have seen this one. It has been a while.
Mhm.
But second, I am positive you had this on another list before. I just can't
Yes,
remember which one.
I know we definitely
Um,
talked about this, but I also can't remember which one.
yeah. I can't put my finger on it, but I know we've talked about it before. But I mean, so many early rising 1980s movie stars in this movie. And with the Ramones as the backdrop band of it, I mean, as far as punk goes, there were two arguments out there as far as punk rock. All right, listeners, if you're not familiar with this, let me school you on a little old school punk argument here. In the UK, there was the Sex Pistols. In the US, there was the Ramones. And the argument was who was more important and who really started the punk movement. I mean, I could not tell you how many times I've had this argument with people, and we would get pissed as hell. And depending on your answer, and I know I lost some friends on this one because I didn't choose either one of those sides. So,
Mhm.
like, for me, I was always the new school punker. I was like big into um, No Effects and Rancid, which came in the mid and later 80s, but really hit their stride in the 90s. And it's the 90s punk movement that is really my punk movement. So like Fat Records, Epitaph, your Lagwagons, mixing a little bit of your Less Than Jake in there with some ska music. I mean, Face to Face, Strung Out. There's so many like 90s bands, I would just like rattle off. I'd be like, oh, these are way better than Sex Pistols or the Ramones. What are you talking about? And then like my friends would leave me, and then like I would be alone. Um, and this is whenever you, well, I'm not going to tell you the technology. Well, if you don't know what a Walkman was, sometimes I listened to music alone with my Walkman because I lost friends. But yeah, this is a great movie. I haven't seen it in a very long time. I don't know how well it ages, because if memory serves, like it may kind of fit into one of those categories of like high school comedy and things that were funny back in the 70s and 80s are not things that we would necessarily think are funny today. And some things, and granted, like part of punk is dealing with a critique on society and what society thinks is acceptable versus not acceptable. I think punk always highlights that. So I mean, for any of you checking out like some of these older films, you always have to remember that, you know, when you get exposed to a scene, or when you get exposed to an idea or language, even the way people talked 40 years ago, it was different. And you'd be hard pressed to find directors to put that kind of language in a film today, because it's just completely politically unacceptable. But in the same token, like punk is always going against what is politically acceptable.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's just kind of what punk rock is.
Yeah,
I think this is.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, so I think this movie holds up incredibly well. It manages to skirt some of the things that we would find that were outdated, socially and politically. There are a few things in the film that I think maybe some audiences won't like, as far as like depictions of guys who just want to get laid. But the film is also making fun of those kinds of guys, and that whole kind of like Porky's attitude of high school comedies of the time. So yeah, I think this movie holds up really well, because it's just kind of, it's just satirizing everything. Everything in the movie is just like, you know, like a Looney Tunes satire. So yeah, I think it's, other than like the fashion, I think it's audiences could still love this one.
Other than fashion, we didn't.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about fashion. No, what am I saying? I'm a professor. I don't have fashion. I'm a punk professor. That's what I do.
Right.
All right, where's your number 3 taking us this time?
Yeah, number 3 might be the best film on this list, but I'll get into why I picked the other 2 ahead of this one. But this is a film called Out of the Blue from 1980, and this film kind of talks about the history of counterculture in this context, in going into the 80s. And so it's about a young girl who's failing school. She may be in middle school, but she's from a broken home. She lives in this dead town, and she's just trying to find her way through this town, but she's also just lashing out. And so she's constantly fighting everyone, her friends, the adults, drinking, and just, you know, kind of in this spiral of you know, kind of dropping out of society. But she's really into punk music, and she's finding her home there, but she's also mourning the loss of Elvis, who died in the late 70s. And so it's you know, I think the use of Elvis in the film is kind of like talking about how the institutions of America are abandoning the society. And so this is a film directed by Dennis Hopper, and he stars as the girl's father. He's an alcoholic, and he's abusive to her, and he's making this film about this crumbling American middle class and how the kids are getting spit out of it. And so as a young actor, he was in Rebel Without a Cause. He played one of the gang members in that film, and then of course he wrote and directed Easy Rider. And so I think this film it goes in line with as a great trilogy of with the other 2 films that kind of show from the 50s to the 80s, where American counterculture is, going from like the rockabilly stuff of the 50s with these pompadoured greasers who get into knife fights, and then we have the counterculture bikers of the late 60s going to the 70s from Easy Rider, and then now we have this punk movement happening in this film. And there's only really one scene in this film where she goes to a punk show, and that's where she finds her home, really. The punks take her in, the band takes her in, and you feel that there is this found family out there in this counterculture, but it's not really enough to escape the harsh realities of where she lives and where she's from. So I sent you another piece another video to kind of show like what I thought the lineage of this kind of punk rock was, starting with the 50s, and how that's in the 70s when the original punks began. That's what they were looking for. They were looking to go back to that primitive kind of music, anger, the expression of anger, of being forced to conform with American society. And so this is, I think, a great film that touches upon punk, but like in a greater context of American society.
Dude, yeah, this was another trailer. Sadly, I haven't seen this one, but this trailer was a journey as well, which I think is like, first off, amazing to be able to cut a trailer together for a film and to take the viewer through a meaningful journey without having to just rely on like catchy phrases or cliche jokes or like a big boom and flash, special effects to be like, oh yeah, I want to see this movie, but to draw you in and say, no, watch what this is about. And it definitely seems like a more dramatic and serious punk film in comparison to the other entries on this list. And, it's about us finding our identity in a world that really seems like society is void of it. Like the 50s had a theme, the 60s had a theme, the 70s was rewriting its theme, and then the 80s comes and everyone's kind of left without a theme. And punk was a way of trying to figure out exactly who are we in all of this mix of stuff, this progression of American society, and is it really a progression at all? And I also wanted to say, like, at this point in watching the trailers, I had noticed the film came out in 1980, and I was like, all right, we're up to 7 films, and all but one of them are from like 1979 or the 80s. And I was like, I almost was going to ask you why, but I know why, and I want to tell listeners why.
Mhm.
And aside from the fact that you're richly steeped in cinema history, but I think it's different here, and that's because, like, if I were to ask many of you listeners out there before listening to this, or if you listen to the punk music trade-off, before listening to that, if I were to ask you, what is punk? What's punk music? So many times over the past decade or two, whenever I talk about punk music, people are like, well, what is that? And it's like, you really don't know, do you? And the answer is no. Punk really gets kicking off in the 70s, but the 80s it really takes off, and all these films are a reflection of that. The fact that punk is the new music on the scene, it's starting to hit, it's anti-establishment, and cinema is always showing us a reflection of society. And so punk music takes off in the 80s, and in the 90s, it's still going, but by the late 90s, early 2000s, like, it dies. And punk and ska music as well, it kind of disappears. And some of the bands are still around, but not too many of them. As far as genres go, like, the music is almost dried up. And I think that's probably a reflection, or rather, that's why a lot of your movies about punk are from the heyday of punk, because cinema does reflect American culture, and American culture has moved on from that because punk and ska music have kind of disappeared from our culture in many ways. What do you think about that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. That's why like SLC Punk is a film that's nostalgic, right? It's looking at time from 10 years. It's set 10 years before it was made, and so yeah, I think as being in the public conscious, it definitely dropped out even by the late 80s. So like most of the films are like in the early to mid 80s in this list, and so punk films aren't really around anymore. They didn't really survive the 80s. It was kind of like a flash in the pan during that time. And then of course I think public consciousness moved towards what I consider like punk's sibling, which is hip hop, as the 90s came in, and then there's this new extreme music that's catching on. And then that, of course, took over movies and television and so forth. So, yeah, the 80s were definitely the heyday of cinema, exploiting this subculture.
Well, I think you're absolutely right to say, like, hip hop is the sibling of punk. They are sibling genres. They're both talking about the exact same things for the most part, as far as going against the establishment, going against, you know, this society of this is supposed to be the way it is, and just saying no. And I can tell you, I don't know a single person who listened to punk who didn't also listen to hip hop and rap. Like all of us did, without a doubt. Um, to think about like the earlier days, like it was not uncommon to see someone to have a No Effects CD right next to a Snoop Dogg CD. Like, it's very, very commonplace.
Mhm.
No, it's a good comparison. I dig it. I
Yeah.
dig it.
Yeah, one last thing about Out of the Blue and its punk attitude is that a lot of the film is circled around or surrounds the Neil Young song "Hey Hey My," and there's lyric in that song that says it's better to burn out than fade away, which is kind of the theme of the movie, and is a theme of a lot of, I think, punk outlook, or is related to a lot of punk outlooks where we talked about aging out of being a punk, and there's this fatalistic mindset of your punk lifestyle, your Sid and Nantes, and sort of like this, you know, dying at a young age, burning out instead of fading away. Like, no, there's nothing more embarrassing than being an old punk, right? In this kind of culture, and so, yeah, it's a film that's just like headed towards some kind of fatalistic ending for this punk lifestyle, and I think it's a great, really great drama that explores that mindset.
I think that's a great way of putting it. Yeah, this is one of the films that I've seen from you, gotten from you, that I'm going to check out. I dig it a lot, my friend. All right, where are you taking us for number 2?
Yeah,
on your
number
list?
2 is my favorite movie on this list. It's Return of the Living Dead from 1985. It's kind of the opposite of Class of 1984. It's the classic 80s punk movie, but it's a horror comedy, and where the punks aren't necessarily the villains of the film, because clearly the zombies are, but it's a great like high school punk movie, but without the high school in it. And so it's a group of punks who are forced to shack up with these inept boomers to survive the night of the zombie apocalypse is happening. And so it's just got some great punk characters. It's a great satire of Reagan's America and this divide between the older the baby boomers and the new generation, the punks. And yeah, it's just a really fun movie. The zombies are great, and it's great watching a movie where the punks are the leads. They're like running around trying to survive the night, and it's got great fashion. And and even though it's like a horror comedy, and it's got these great joke gags in it, and it's really bloody. There's kind of underlying political jabs at the state of the union at the time, where they're like, we should call the police, and the punks are like, we can't call the police, they're going to kick our ass. And just kind of like these things are kind of woven into the film, where like, even though they're jokes, but it's taking itself pretty seriously with what it's trying to go after in its satirization. So yeah, this is one of the, if not the funnest horror film that I can imagine.
I must say, I was not at all surprised that you included what appeared to be a genre horror flick comedy parody. I mean, not at all. And at first, I thought this was because of the name, Return of the Living Dead. I thought this might be a serious zombie movie mixed with punk. I had heard of this movie, but I'd never seen it. Because me in horror movies, I don't do them. So like the idea that like I started seeing the punks and I was like, okay, where is this going? And then like I started seeing like slapstick comedy kind of things, and like I was like, you know what? I actually might be able to watch this one. I was like, okay.
Yeah,
And I think that's funny. Your favorite genre parody film. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, and also it's got a great soundtrack. It's got the Cramps, the Damned, 45 Grave. It's just it's a great package all around.
I dig it. Like I said, I may have to check it out.
Yeah.
All right. What do you have for your number 1 punk movie?
Yeah. Number 1 is the great punk art film Repo Man from 1984. This is another great satire of American culture, using punk aesthetic and explorations of punk lifestyle in the with an anti-Reagan message. And so there's nothing more capitalistic to me than repossessing someone else's property. And so it's about a punk who gets a job as a repo man. And he's kind of meeting these different wild guys who do this for a living. And it puts him in a position of reflecting upon whether he is a punk or is he a repo man? What camp is he in? Is he a capitalist or is he an anti-capitalist? Is he like his parents or is he not like his parents? And yeah, and so like that's the plot of the movie, but really like they're also looking for this mystery car that has some sort of potential alien technology in the trunk that's evaporating people. And yeah, it gets really crazy. And yeah, it just, it feels like it's from another planet, and it's funny, and it's it has a lot of jabs at consumerism and the conformity of the time. And so yeah, it's also got a lot of great punk music in the film. And so and of course it's got great performances by Emilio Estevez and Harry Dean Stanton. And yeah, this is one of the all-time great punk movies.
It makes me sad that I haven't even heard of this movie
What?
before. No, never heard of it. But in the trailer, when they lift up the trunk of the car, but they don't show you what's in the trunk, but you see this like bright light, and I was like MacGuffin right away. And it like so made me think of Pulp Fiction by Quentin Tarantino. You know,
Yeah.
you never get to see what's in the suitcase. I like got that feeling completely. But it also made me think. I wanted to ask you to explain to listeners out there, what is a MacGuffin, and how or why do you use a MacGuffin inside of a film?
Yeah, a MacGuffin is a very simple thing. It's the one thing that all the characters want in the plot of the movie. And so it's a great device to use to push all your characters into action. And so they're all circling around the thing. In Hitchcock, I believe he's the one who came up with that term, the MacGuffin, because many of his films that was the plot. Everyone was after this one thing. And then all the story was kind of built around that. And so he also said the MacGuffin wasn't important. Didn't matter what it was. It was just a thing that everyone perceived value over. And so in this case, you're looking for this thing in the trunk, but it's not really about what the thing is. It's really about why everyone else is putting this value on the thing and what it says about them.
And that's why you don't get to see what's in the trunk, or like in Pulp Fiction. In Pulp Fiction, you don't get to see what's in the suitcase, because it doesn't really matter what it is. It just matters that it's what everyone wants.
Yes, exactly.
And that's always why a MacGuffin has always pissed me off, because it's like, if it doesn't matter, then people shouldn't want it. And we're like,
yeah.
But I digress.
Yeah, I will say that this MacGuffin is a little different, because it does, without spoiling the ending, it does come through that it does have some effect on what happens once you kind of, it's still a little ambiguous, but it kind of has a bigger impact than, say, like Pulp Fiction or whether it's the Maltese Falcon or whatever. Yeah.
I dig it. No, it's just what I thought of. And the trailer was definitely interesting as can be. And, this was during Emilio Estevez's time, where in the 80s he was actually working a lot. And a lot of people thought Emilio Estevez was going to go on and do a whole lot more than he did. But, Hollywood is Hollywood.
Yeah.
And punk is punk. And that's Gregory Day's top 10 list. That's a great list, my friend. But why don't we start off with a few questions for you? And really, I'd want to say, like I always like to say, why this list? Why'd you pick this list this time?
Yeah, I mean,
so let's for a lot of new listeners, this may be their first list of yours that we talk about. So our last list that you did was 10 important female directed films, and the one before that was 10 of the greatest films ever, and then now you got top 10 punk films. Why punk films?
Yeah, I think it's something that obviously that we were just talking about is not around anymore, so it's it's in the past. But also, this is a list I really wanted to make to talk to you specifically about, because of our shared love of the music genre. And there's a lot of rich punk films out there from this small window in time when movie makers were focusing on this. And so this is it's not exactly a genre of movies, because they kind of fit in different genres, but it is a subculture of films that I really do enjoy. And so I wanted to make sure to share that with everyone.
All right, so I'm going to give you the punk test. I didn't warn you about this one before, but yeah, the punk test. And for you listeners out there, if you're not sure what any of this means, don't worry. No one knows what any of this means. It's punk. It's dead. All right. So question number 1, Ramones or Sex Pistols?
Ramones.
Good answer. Good answer. Question number 2, Op Ivy or Rancid?
Oh, I gotta go Op Ivy.
Oh, correct answer too. Okay, Rancid or NoFX?
Rancid.
Oh, wrong answer. Wrong answer. Fat Records or Epitaph?
Epitaph.
Oh, wrong answer again. All right, final question. You better get this one right. Is punk dead?
No.
Great, perfect answer. No, it is not. So long as we live, the movement thrives. And punk is supposed to be in the fringes. Punk is not supposed to be mainstream. So I mean, like, okay. Another question. New last question. What was the alternative band who proved that you can sell out of punk by not being punk or being too punk? Or you know what I mean? But what's the band who sold out that everyone, it started such a crazy shift and schism in the punk culture in the 90s?
Was it Green Day?
It is most certainly Green Day.
Oh yeah.
Yes, for those who don't know, I know a lot of people do know who Green Day is, but Green Day for their first and second album were very, very punk. But then they started getting a little bit of pop, and then they hit the mainstream, and then boom, they hit the scene, and then alternative started to become a music genre, alternative music. And they were interviewed, and they were asked, you know, what do you think about being an alternative band? And they're like, we're not a alternative band, we're the alternative band. And the punk community exploded. And at that point in time, you could not be a pumpkin like Green Day, not outwardly. Remember those days?
Yes. I mean, I think they were probably the most important mainstream punk band since Nirvana. Like Nirvana ends, and then here comes Green Day.
So many high schools had their like prom songs to that Green Day song.
Yeah, that was when I
Fork in the
wasn't a
Road.
fan of them anymore.
Yeah. Definitely too mainstream at that point.
Yes,
And graduation songs. Yeah. All right, well, you got most of your punk thing correct. So that's good. You didn't say Sex Pistols, so I'm happy about that. All right, but I always do like to ask you though, do you have any runners up as far as punk movies go?
Yeah, there were two that I couldn't fit in this list. One was because I felt it was a little redundant to include it, was the Trauma film Class of Nukem High, which is another punk high school juvenile delinquent movie with nuclear waste monsters in it. And so yeah, it's a great film. It's a lot of fun. It's another satire of both the punk culture and monster movies and a lot of the Reagan era stuff. But I just couldn't fit on the list. But there is a newer film that I really struggled to try to find a place on this list, but it's Green Room from 2015. I'm not sure if you've seen this film or not.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, great film starring Anton Yelchin. It's the punks versus neo-Nazis film where this hardcore band goes to this like Pacific Northwest bar out in the middle of nowhere to play a gig, and they don't really realize where they're going. When they get there, everyone there is kind of ingrained in this white supremacist group out there, and they witness them kill someone in the green room of the club, and they get stuck in the green room and have to battle out all night trying to get out of the room with this neo-Nazi gang outside the club. Yeah, it's a fierce flick, and it came out in 2015 right when Trump was running for president, and so it was like the perfect kind of film of that time when we were dealing with this rise of white supremacy and nationalism in this country. Yeah, go check this one out. It is intense.
Damn, yeah, it sounds it. Like I said, it sounded very, very familiar. And that is most certainly a tense time in American history.
Yes.
For sure. All right, well, I also want to ask you, if you made a top 10 movie list of your top 10 favorite movie genres, would punk movies make that top 10 list?
No, I don't think so. If it was
you broke my heart.
If it was a broader numbered list, probably, but not in top 10. No.
So sad. But I understand because there wasn't that many of them made, you know, because but the future is always possible. Plus, punk is never dead.
Yeah,
all right. And a last one for you that we always end with, a little bit of a two-parter for you. Firstly, why is this list specifically important to you? And secondly, why should other people view this list as important as well?
Yeah, this is important to me because I think that not many musical genres are represented well in film. I think a lot, especially with Hollywood films, they're exploiting the surge in popularity of something. So like the rock and roll films of the 50s are not as great as real rock, the experience of listening to rock and roll. There are not too many great hip hop films. There are some good ones, but like it's like kind of the cultures are kind of watered down for cinema. And so I think at this point in time, right, as punk is exploding in the 80s, there are these, it's kind of a perfect storm of these great indie filmmakers and some like exploitation producers who jumped on it, who did make really great films and collaborated with people who were in the punk scene to make these great films. And they kind of crossed over into different genres, whether thrillers or horror films or comedies or whatever. And so a lot of these films are just really great, which is, you know, I do love punk as a musical genre, but I think that a lot of these films really stand the test of time that help support punk. And so it's important to me that these films get seen, and that, you know, we kind of remember that this time, especially when we're also living in such a politically, you know, emotionally heightened world right now, that we don't have a lot of films like this coming out showing people struggling to deal with conformity or dealing with the pressures, the political pressures of just trying to live in this country. And so I think if our modern sensibility can learn a lot from these films, and I wish that people made, you know, more films like this today, which is why I think they're very important to me. And so I'm just hoping that if people see them, then they would create the same kind of art for a new generation.
I dig it. I dig it. And you know, it's interesting to think, to jump off of what you said, you know, considering the political climate that we live in today, um, it's almost kind of interesting to me that punk hasn't made a comeback. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And if this is vague to listeners, then perhaps it's unintentionally intentional. If but really, to think about what is the heart and the essence of punk, and to think that it's still sitting there on the fringes, on the sidelines, because being center stage was never what it was about. Um, but like, I wouldn't be surprised if, well, granted, there is no radio anymore, and goodness knows YouTube trending videos is just kitty cats and Minecraft crap. But you know, it wouldn't be too surprising if somewhere in the near future we would see some punk stuff trending.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be entirely surprised.
Yeah, there's a really great community on Bandcamp for punk, which is cool because it's, you know, it's designed as a place where people can upload their music without having to worry about record deals or streaming contracts. And so yeah, there's a lot of great stuff, a lot of good hardcore bands out there today utilizing Bandcamp. But I also think, like, you know, a lot of these films warned us, these 80s films warned us about how corporations and politics were going to destroy everything, and the conformity of American society was going to destroy everything. And so I think, like, in you know, in one way, those systems won out. There's more corporate, you know, spread, the homogenization of everything. It's kind of pushing everyone, if you're on the fringes, even further and further away from being able to have that comeback, like a comeback to seriously affect pop culture or the status quo. And so I think it's even harder now to be that rebellious, unless you're, or to be rebellious and then affect people in the mainstream, as opposed to someone like you or I who are going out there seeking that kind of music, actively looking for it. And so yeah, I think it is harder today to have that impact on mainstream culture than it was, you know, back in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. And you made me think. I wanted to ask you again, if people, for listeners who want to check out these films, where might be some places they can find them for your top 10 list today?
Ooh, let's see. I think some of these might be very difficult to find. Some of them you can actually find on YouTube, like Suburbia. I rewatched it before this listen. It's on YouTube. You can watch it, pretty good quality for free. But Shudder has a couple of these, and maybe I would say Netflix or something like that, or would have some of these other ones. But some of these are a little difficult to come by. You may have to rent them on your local streaming service like Apple TV or Amazon or something. That might be the best way to go about getting some of these.
Or check your local library,
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Local libraries, you can always rent videos from them. And even if they don't
Yeah.
have them at your branch, do the little online card catalog
Mhm,
searching. And if it's
mhm.
at another branch, they can send it to your branch
Yeah.
for free. And you get an email notification of when it arrives, and you get to rent it for free. But
Absolutely, yeah.
there is one qualifier there. You need a DVD player or a DVD drive on your laptop in order to watch
Yes,
that.
yes,
Like
yep,
I tell you,
yep.
my laptops I don't even purchase with DVD drives anymore or CD
Mhm.
drives. Like I don't.
Yeah.
They're not needed. They make laptops heavier and they make them more expensive too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, let's say to the point of all this, like what you're saying is also if you have like a local video store, like please go support them because they're going to have stuff that your streaming services are never going to have. But I will say, just even if you're not interested in it, it is important to support physical media because of the way streaming is going. It's you're not going to find everything that's ever made on a streaming service. Like they're getting highly curated with their own content, and you can see the divisions going on. You can see what's happening with HBO Max now, firing people and writing off content as tax write-offs, and like you're never going to see that that content that they're creating. And so investing in physical media and playing on a player, I know it takes up space and I know it's a little expensive. It's not the price of streaming, but that's the only way you're really going to be able to see the things that you want to see without a corporate streaming giant telling you what you should be watching on their platforms.
Yeah, for real, because the streaming platforms. This is such a punk conversation, by the way, people, because we're going anti-streaming platform, but who cares? Let's do it. The streaming platforms, they will buy content en masse for very cheap. That's like unowned, or the people, if there's like a small production company that's about to go out of business and they have maybe 10,000 films that they're looking to sell bundled together, and a streaming service can purchase them and then periodically put maybe a little bit here and there on and then take it off. But the streaming service's goal is to create a platform that's aimed at acquiring new subscribers. And the way you acquire new subscribers isn't just like by your back catalog, it's about your new content. And it's about churning out new content to get new subscribers. And so these streaming platforms they have an incentive to push all new stuff, to get you to view all new stuff. And therefore, they're not going to take old stuff and put it on that regularly, because they're not going to get new subscribers. Because let's say Netflix, guess what? They add SLC Punk next month. I don't think anyone's going to join Netflix because SLC Punk is on Netflix. But they create some new content that can draw new subscribers. So like Gregory Day's right. There's a lot of this older content that's just being lost. And we won't see it ever again, save for your local video store and library. And even at libraries, you can request. They may not do it, but public libraries do it for books and for films. You can put in request for them to purchase the physical copies of them, and ask your librarian about it. They'll tell you, yeah, we do take requests for books to purchase and films to purchase. And they see how many people wanted each book or each film, and then they choose like that. So who knows? Maybe you can even get your library to purchase it for you. Anything more you want to go against establishment about? You want to punk out anymore? Or are we done with this one?
No, I think I'm good.
Yes, I know, right? I think everyone else is too. They're like, what the hell is going on? And this is a punk is so long of a conversation. It really is.
Yeah.
But before we head out, I always like to ask you what you have going on lately at HipsvilleAD that you can tell the listeners about.
Yeah, I'm on a little bit of a hiatus right now between series, but my long form series that went through most of this year, Real Revenge, is wrapped up, and last piece is up on my Substack. So you go to badday.substack.com to check that out and go read the whole series about revenge cinema. And I'll be back next month with some new content.
Excellent. Yes, enjoy your break, my friend.
Thank you.
And that's HipsvilleAD's top 10 list. Check out our friend Gregory Day online. Follow him everywhere. And interested in writing into the show? Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, myself on LinkedIn. Email us, people. Let your voice be heard. Always remember that Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. Talk to you soon, Lofi listeners. Pickering and Day, signing off.
Adios.